Welcome to the Book of Urm, Tales of Piecora, the Haunted Fortress. Chapter 9, Castles, Kings and Rooks. Castles, Kings and Rooks. Ravsez, lying flat on her back, opened her eyes to see perfectly joined wooden floorboards above her. But they were translucent, and she could make out blurry aspects of the luxurious dining hall and the hanging chandelier beyond. She also saw herself, lying on her stomach on the floor above her, peering back at her in wonder. But something was strange about her other self's eyes, brightly reflecting a red light from somewhere like a nocturnal animal. Something gripped her around her torso and spun her around, and she realized she was underwater. There, in the darkness beneath her, was the giant eye of Ichthyophiloksu, staring back at her, its gigantic tentacles roping quietly in the shadows on all sides. It began to pull her toward itself with one of its wide appendages until she heard a dull, concussive crack above her. Diving in beside her with one muscular arm around her shoulders, another large arm grabbed the trunk of the tentacle wrapped around Ravsez. A white, hot flame erupted around the tentacle as the hand gripped it tightly and squeezed, immolating it into black sheets of burnt flesh and muscle that drifted upward and away from them. Freed from the horror, Ravsez then saw the hand point directly at the eye, and a thin white beam appeared between the eye and the hand instantaneously. The eye began bubbling grotesquely, and Ravsez whirled around to face her saviour. His white beard was long, as was his long flowing hair, and his face was chiselled as if hardened in a kiln. He had large, sinewy muscles, and Ravsez thought he looked like a Canonian god. But then she noticed the two long, white, spiralling horns that stood straight back from his hairline, and his white tail was thick, scaled, and ended in a wide arrow point, almost as if it might be used for swimming. Then she saw his white, leathery wings fully unfold behind him. They were like bat wings at least 20 metres from wingtip to wingtip, and they filled her vision from side to side. His face was close to hers, and his silver goat's pupil eyes locked onto hers, and he smiled warmly with his sharp, elongated Unscavian teeth. Suddenly, the blast erupted beneath them from the exploding eye, and they were propelled upward through the icy, translucent floorboards in a raging upswell of cold, dark water. We always aim to control the centre of the board. By placing our pawns and pieces here, we get more space to move around and attack. Ravsez began to hear the words as if they were drifting down to her from a tree in autumn. In the opening, it's super important to develop our pieces quickly. This means getting our knights and bishops out early, so they're ready to jump into action. We don't want to move the same piece multiple times in the opening because that wastes time. They were clearer now, and she recognised them as her son's voice. We should castle early to tuck our king away and connect our rooks. Our pawns should work together. A strong pawn structure makes our positions solid. Always be wary of forks, pins and skewers. It's all about spotting patterns, controlling key files and diagonals. Ravsez slowly opened her eyes. Above her was the large crystal chandelier hanging from the mural ceiling, and her mind filled with memories like a returning tide. Walking with Piecora in the snow hand in hand as they discussed her people, discovering the crater, and descending into the crater and finding Valesh's home, staring wondrously at the large red gem by the lamplight on the table, watching her son staring at figurines on a white marble chessboard, and then free-falling into the dark abyss. She suddenly shook all over, and Artur stopped talking. "Mummy!" he yelled, followed by, "Piecora! Valesh! She's awake! She's awake!" He bounced up and down on the bed where she lay, causing her head to throb painfully. "Shh, shh. Artur. My love, please don't shout," she said quietly. But then she felt a sudden heat in her hand, like someone was pouring hot wax into her palm. It was both painful and soothing at the same time. The heat flowed up her arm, through her shoulder and into her mind, and the throbbing went away. Looking down, she saw Otter holding her hand with both of his, and he was looking at her intensely with his large, expressive, unscavian eyes and messy, ginger-red hair. His clothes were still stained and torn, and was he missing a tooth? "That's how you win at chess, Mumi," the little boy said gravely. And then he looked down and away, back at what consumed all of his attention. A collection of stones, trinkets, and baubles positioned on the bed next to her leg, as if he were in the middle of a high-stakes war game with himself. Ravzezi slowly shifted herself into a seated position on the bed as her vision came into clearer focus. The bed was still filthy from the landslide, and a wide trail of mud and debris led from the bed to the once beautiful white stone hearth, now ruptured and back-filled with heavy stones and detritus from above. The large dining hall was even larger than Ravzi's first thought as she tried to make out all of the shelves and paintings on the far side of the room, opposite from where she and Artur fell in from. Walking in from an entranceway on the left, Piecora and Valish joined the mother and son. They carried bundles of clothes, fabrics, and various other items in several heavy satchels. "I don't know who lives down here, but they're living better than anyone I ever met on the surface," Piecora said as they strode into the room. "I wonder if Einda knows about this," said Valesh. "He'll be rightly pissed if he gets word that people are living down here in his mansion. That will soon one day be mine, when he gets shanked in the gullet." Piecora came over to the side of the bed and began undressing Ravziz's head bandage gently. Valesh dropped her satchel down onto the foot of the bed, tossing Artur's makeshift war game in all directions. He folded his arms and glowered at her. "How do you know people are living down here?" asked Ravzizi weakly. Piecora pointed upwards. "Who's lighting those candles? Who's sweeping the floor?" she said. "Dare I say, after our entrance, I'm surprised we haven't met them already." Valesh hopped up onto the table and looked around, kicking her shoed feet as if lounging on the side of a dock. Ravziz noticed the shoes, and then the rest of her outfit. Her over-large sleep shirt was replaced with a clean-fitted light blue bodice laced up the back over a cream chemise that was tucked into a gathered skirt of light brown wool. Detachable, white linen sleeves were tied to the bodice that matched a simple white linen coif covering her combed, streaky blonde hair. She shifted her gaze to Piecora and noticed that her beautiful black braids were neatly worked into intricate coils and knots around her head and antlers. Several long braids hung on either side of her dark face, which for the first time had no Silajan ink markings. Ravziz smelled the unmistakable scent of lavender and vanilla salts. How long was I asleep?" she asked. "Long enough for our hostess and I to get a good look around, and for your whelp to get mighty ripe," said Piecora calmly. "But he wouldn't leave your side. Now that you're awake—" She stopped suddenly, and Ravzizi saw Piecora staring at her forehead while holding the bloody head wrap limp in her hand. "What is it?" Ravzizi asked. "Your wound. It's gone," said Piecora in wonder. "Are Unskavia all fast healers like yourself?" "Not more than humans, I would think, and I'm nothing special," said Ravziz. Then she raised her hand to her forehead, and aside from flakes of dried blood, she could not feel any wound at all, not even a cut or blemish. "Stag, I've never seen anything like it," Piecora said, openly expressing her amazement. "I thought your skull was cracked right open, but it's as if you were never hurt at all." Ravzizi didn't answer, but she thought of Artur and the strange heat she felt when her son clasped her hand with both of his, and how her throbbing head pain diminished soon after. She quickly dismissed the thoughts as pure superstitions, knowing that she wasn't in her right mind or thinking clearly at all when she woke up. After several more moments of awkward silence, Piecora shrugged and rummaged through the bags they carried in with them. "Guess I won't be needing these," Piecora mumbled to herself as she dropped a sewing kit, several white rags, a pair of long tweezers, and several other items that might belong inside a wealthy person's medicine cabinet. Finally, she pulled out some clothes that looked as if they'd never been worn, as well as a few oranges, apples, and pears. We found guest rooms, a game room, several large halls, as large as this one, and a kitchen the size of the bishop itself, Piecora said. How are you feeling now? I feel fine, I guess, Ravses said, still trying to collect her thoughts, and wondering about whether she even had such a wound in her head at all, which she might doubt if it weren't for Piecora's reaction. We brought some clothes for you, but if you wanted to get washed up, there are several washrooms and a large bathhouse with hot springs, Piecora said. Ravses dropped down from the bed, and the four of them explored the areas of the mansion that Piecora described. Ravses couldn't believe the size of it all. It dwarfed anything she had ever seen in Muth, and imagined several Veklischer mansions could fit inside here, including the gardens. Most notably was the height of the ceilings, which were more than a story high everywhere they went. Her mind constantly resorted to the impracticalities of trying to keep such a place clean. Moreover, she saw no ladders, step stools, or anything that might indicate an effort to gain the upper walls, chandeliers, shelves, and ceilings. Yet, besides the dirt they created when they arrived, she could not find any dust in any of the rooms. Ravses and Artur bathed in the hot bathhouse before putting on new clothes that they found among the guest quarters. Ravses wondered if the clothes had ever been previously worn. When the four of them finally made their way to the kitchen, they resembled a party of upper-class dignitaries visiting for a weekend of parlour games. Ravsesa wore a deep red corset that shaped her waist over a long white chemise with sleeves that billowed out and tied around her wrists. A wide gathered linen skirt, the colour of yellowed bone, was tied around her waist and hung down around her feet, which were fitted with light brown soft leather boots that laced up the back of her calves. She tied her hair in 2 ponytails, with satin ribbons dyed in maroon. Artur wore a silver linen tunic with a black doublet and matching black cap, and dark brown breeches that fastened to his knees. Black hose were visible beneath his knees to his feet, which were now covered in rich leather shoes that encased his ankles. Valesh tugged at his cap playfully and said, "You look like a fine young Callistico now, Lord Artur," to which he simply stared back without responding. Ravses noticed that Piecora did not partake in any of the clothing here, but the Xianjian garb that she already wore was cleaned and mended. They found the large open kitchen surprisingly barren, except for a single room with fresh fruits, breads, jams, pastries, and dried meats enough to feed a small family for a month. This room led to a private study where they ate around a circular dining table with large, exquisite silver candle holders shaped like coiled dragons in its centre. "This place feels more like a vacation cottage than a home or mansion, despite its size and layout," said Ravses as she bit into a slice of meat that Piecora cooked for everyone over one of the kitchen's dozen stoves. That kitchen could feed several families and their militias, but now it's dormant except for what we've found in that small storage closet. It's as if a small crew remains here to maintain the place while the master family is gone. "But who lives here? And where are they?" asked Piecora. "And where are these servants that you speak of?" "I don't know. I only guess from what I can see here, and my life before coming to Kanonaya." "Have you ever been down this far, Valesh?" asked Ravsese. "No, I haven't," Valesh responded glumly. "I don't understand any of this. All of the stories that speak of the dangers surrounding the sinkhole, the haunted fortress of Callistico and all that. Explorers venturing too deep and never returning. Ghosts stealing your soul, giant bats lifting you into the air and dropping you into their nests far below, ghouls and fiends lurking in the mire at the bottom of the crater. So many horror stories surrounding this place. I've tried to go down, but I always get too scared." Then she threw a chicken bone at her plate in frustration. "But this is my home. My home. Nobody else belongs here but the Callistico. I had no idea this was down here this whole time, all while I'm living in squalor in the streets, My family line cast to the corners of the country begging for coins where they could, and the mansion has been down here all along, all this time, intact, and even looked after. What in the world is going on here? Where is everyone? Who is down here?" She kicked herself back from the table and stormed off into the kitchen. Arthur said quietly at his spoon full of dripping pudding, "She's still mad I beat her." A high-pitched shriek pierced everyone's ears from the kitchen, and before Ravses could make any sense of it, Piecora was up with her hatchet and shouldering through the kitchen door, nearly taking it off its hinges. Ravses jumped up and followed quickly after. One of the freezer doors was open, and both Ravses and Piecora ran to the entrance and found Valesh staring up at the frozen corpse of a man, naked, hanging from a gigantic meat hook that pierced clean through its neck and out the other side. Piecora yanked Valesh out of the freezer and poked the corpse with her hatchet, stepping closer to it, while Ravses stayed outside, holding the door open. The dead body looked to be once a middle-aged human of slightly greying hair, tall and gangly, with a manicured moustache and long, slender fingers that looked trained in a musical instrument. His body was completely frozen in multiple layers of ice. The rest of the freezer had piles of ice and snow shovelled all along the walls, but otherwise contained nothing else except for the body. Piecora slowly stepped out and shut the freezer door. Ravses shivered from head to toe and rubbed her arms together. Looking back into the study where they ate, she could see Arthur still eating his pudding, oblivious to what happened. "Back in the room, quickly," said Piecora, as she ushered Ravses and Valesh into the study where Arthur sat. Valesh flopped onto a leather settee in the opposite corner from the kitchen door and put her hands over her face. Ravses stood behind Arthur and looked over the table at Piecora, who remained by the kitchen door with her head down in deep thought. Ravses wanted to say something but couldn't think of anything proper. Finally, Piecora raised her head and said to the room, "Nobody is left alone from now on. Is that clear?" She began in a crisp, commanding voice. "We know we are not alone, but this changes things. We have no idea what we are dealing with. We don't know who that is in the freezer or why they are being preserved like meat, except for what it implies. That whatever is living here does not distinguish meat from people, and it may prefer people. I have no idea, but I think we are in greater danger than I thought." "That man," Ravses said, finally finding her voice. He looked like someone who might work here, or might have lived here or visited here recently. He concerned himself with his appearance, from my brief observation. He had all his teeth and his fingernails, groomed like a harp player." "And there's only one of him in there," said Piecora. "So he's not a brigand or a thief, or there would be more of them in there. Yes, he did look fairly well cared for, didn't he? Stag, what has been going on down here beneath this city?" Ravses, Piecora and Valesh deliberated a while longer about what they should do next, now with an unmistakable feeling of lurking, hidden dread. Eventually it was decided that they shouldn't go back the way they came, as the cave-in sealed them all in preventing any escape that way. But there was still much more to the mysterious mansion left unexplored. Wide arches and halls that they passed by, doors and doorways unopened, and several stairs leading both up and down. They were also fatigued after eating their meal, and agreed that they should try to find a single large bedroom that could be defensible if necessary. "We'll follow you, Valesh," Piecora said, "but go slowly and quietly. We are right behind you, so do not be afraid." Ravses then said, "After all, this is your home, isn't it? Perhaps we are finally realizing your purpose here, to discover and undo whatever curse lies upon this place and bring the Callistico back together." Then the four of them were off, with Valesh in the lead, and Piecora behind Ravses and Arthur, whom she kept close. They crept through the wide, cavernous halls of the mansion, feeling like small dolls trapped inside a labyrinthian house with dark, polished wood floors, high plaster walls and mural ceilings that were sometimes arched. other times domed, but never flat. No windows of any kind were found, as if the place were intended to be underground all along. The walls were covered in lush paintings of landscapes and portraits of people, some of whom Valesh tried to guess at their identities. Here and there, various details signalled that life existed here in the mansion besides the four intruders. Lit candles on a side table, an open book on the arm of a large, richly appointed chair, a plate of half-eaten food, a long pipe set in the side of a bronze ash bucket, still smoking. But they never saw, nor heard, anyone else but themselves. They passed large statues carved from stone or moulded in green-tinted bronze. Ornamental suits of armour stood silently in dark corners, beside arched doorways and adjacent to stairs leading up and down. Shields, swords, axes, maces and flails hung on the walls of nearly every room they passed through. Lavish baths and washrooms featured hot water boiling from heated springs from the surrounding earth, and were littered with baskets of cleansing salts and soaps, towels and robes and slippers. Bedrooms and guest rooms featured inspirations from various cultures, some of which were recognisable, like the realms and cities within Cannonia. Multiple rooms featured decor from lands that traded regularly with Cannonia, like Cienga and Muth, Brenz and Helicles, Ganst and Vodup. Some rooms even contained furniture and appointments from the dwarven nation of Strunda, the desert people of Inomen, and the Shava elves of Kalanvaloth, who live beneath the mountains of Ereth Andul. Other rooms were wildly unrecognisable, and the companions stood in the doorways of these rooms trading guesses at what possible cultures they were looking at, based on each of their limited understanding of the world. One room featured an ornamented carcass totem from a giant steppesland beast, with many different animal hides of stripes and spots draped over woven furniture, and a shrine of bones, coins, gems and jewellery that culminated into a large skull with two massive tusks curving outward from its jaws. Piecora indicated the room's theme as Banwa, then quickly moved on without saying another word. "Have you noticed something?" asked Valesh, stopping suddenly as they walked along a wide-open concourse that curved gradually to the left. Several branching corridors on both sides led to unknown parts of the mansion. Lamps, hanging from hooks and placed on small shelves along the walls, provided a dim, ambient light within the vast hall. Above, the ceilings soared over them in a curved, concave arch with a painted mural depicting a blue sky filled with white, billowing clouds and large birds circling on outstretched wings. Valesh turned to face her companions and said, "This place, it feels less like a home or even a building of any kind, and more like a rabbit warren." She extended her arms and slowly circled around. "These hallways just go on and on and on. I feel like I'm trapped in a maze. Is it just my imagination, or does it feel like this place was actually built underground? How is that possible? This is my family's home, Domosithre Entia Flusthumai, home of the harp and wave. Stories tell that it was a magnificent fortress built in the midst of the city. Entire roads and neighbourhoods were diverted around its construction. But now, it seems like we've been walking forever, and not once have we backtracked or rediscovered a place we already visited. It feels like we just keep going deeper and deeper, and all of these rooms, the artwork, the polished floors, there is no end to it all." Ravsez had begun wondering the same thing lately. How on earth did this place exist on the surface? It was an impossible concept to grasp. Piecora folded her arms, looked around and said, "None of us are equipped to sense any kind of orientation down here. I've heard this is natural among the dwarven kind. Asthrundran would be able to guide us with no problem as long as the rules of the world still applied here," Ravsisi said. "I've met Strundrans. They are a stoic people, taller in pride and presence than their physical bodies convey. They live in the mountains just on the other side of the Bulgog from Muth. The dwarves of Strunda are masters of the underground. Some whisper in Muth that there is a tunnel beneath the Bulgog that connects our two countries, as impossible as that is to believe. But anyone who has met as Thrundrun dwarf would believe it. It's not meant for people, Artur said quietly in his high child voice. Ravsesi glanced twice down at him before registering that he spoke. "What's that, love?" she asked. He pointed upward, and then behind them, then forward. "This isn't a home for people. It's for something bigger than us," he said flatly. An astute observation, Artur, but something this big would leave scratches in the floor at least, snapped Valesh. All of the trappings of my family's wealth that fill this place from floor to ceiling would be destroyed by now if something that big lived here. "I wonder if it was remade or reshaped," said Piecora. "The stories say that the Callistico mansion fell into the ground many generations ago. Perhaps all of this happened during that time." After several more hypothetical exchanges regarding the state of the mansion and the mysteries within, they continued their exploration until they came upon a large, circular library of books, tomes, and relics. Ornate tapestries adorned the vast rotunda, hanging down from the walls or suspended between shelves. Above, another domed plaster ceiling showcased a painted mural of another blue sky, except instead of birds, this painting featured large reptilian beasts of many different colours, sizes, and textures, all with outstretched, massive, leathery wings, and they flew together in a perfect circle, surrounding a central monster larger than them all. Its scales glimmered like polished diamond, shining and iridescent, reflecting the colours of the other dragons flying around it. Strangely, the pose of this central, magnificent winged lizard was as if it were asleep and falling from the sky, its wings half folded on themselves, and the beast's eyes were closed. Directly beneath the domed ceiling above, at the centre of the circular library, stood a realistically sculpted and painted relief made from plaster and built into a large wooden circular table in the very middle of the room. Ravsi surmised that the sculpture was a map that depicted the entire known world, with Kananaya in the very middle of the main continent, Muth far to the west on its own peninsula, and Sienja to the east of Kananaya. They stood next to the gigantic stone map, as Artur stood on his toes and pulled himself up with his hands to peer over the edge. Piecora reached toward the middle of the mainland, and gently ran her hands over what Ravsesa guessed to be the encircling forest of Kiahala, based on books she had read back in Veklisha Mansion. According to the stories, the forest was a ring that protected the undying lands of Cynthia, home of the Eldar, who were ancestors to the elves. "Have you been there?" asked Ravsesa, noticing a peculiar look cross her friend's face. "I have," said Piecora quietly, lost in her thoughts. Ravsesa stared at her in wonder. "According to the texts I've read, the Cynthians are long gone from this world, faded into myth. But the encircling forest is so dangerous, no one who enters ever returns. But you have been inside?" "I have been all the way through Kiahala," said Piecora cautiously, her voice just above a whisper. "I supped with the Abrignalians, swam in the pool of Vioyan, and travelled to the bottom of Loch Anham Reota, the lake of frozen time, to meet its queen, the Aeon worm, Bogjankrai Marana. I fed from the rivers and hunted game in the heartland within the encircling forest. I walked among the crystal spires of Avanyamon on the hill of Gorai, and stood beneath Shurai, the mother tree, on her sacred soil. I even felt her dew on my face." She paused a moment, then said, "And yes, I have met a Cynthian, though these memories fill me with such despair that I struggle to find the words to go on. To retell the tales is to relive them, so I shan't say any more except for this. The Cynthians are not gone from this world, though they were on the very brink of being lost forever. And although they survived, it may be long after our lives are over, until they venture out of Kiahala and meet the world outside their home. I do not expect that I shall ever see them again unless I return to them one day, for I've been granted a special friendship with them and am always welcome there." Ravsese finally looked down and saw that her son was also staring at Piecora like she was. "Quite something, isn't it, Orta?" Ravsese said, smiling and putting her hand on his shoulder. She said, "To be in the presence of such a person who has seen so much, who has lived through such adventure in her lifetime. We should do everything she asks us to do, for she is our protector. You listen to her and do what she says, understood? Even if I am not with you." She affectionately tousled his hair and guided him away from the large map table. "Let's be getting on now and leave her to her thoughts." But as she looked back, her eyes lingered in fascination at Piecora, as the Xianjian stared melancholically at the map table and Kiahala, the encircling forest that surrounds Cynthia. Ravsese detected something bothering Piecora that the Xianjian held deep within herself, and it seemed that she didn't want to show it. A while later, the four of them stood together inside a small guest room at the end of a narrow hall. Only one large bed filled the room with a small desk and a lamp against the wall. "The three of you get into the bed and rest. I'll take watch until I wake you up, Ravsese," said Piecora. "You can take over and I'll get a little sleep. I wish we could all get a full night's rest, but I don't trust this place. I feel we are being watched from the very walls." Ravsese nodded her head and hopped onto the bed with Ortor. Valesh crawled up and laid on the other side of Ortor. "I'll be right on the other side of the door if you need me for anything," said Piecora. Then she left the room and shut the door behind her, leaving them in total darkness. Ravsese drifted into deep sleep as soon as her eyes closed. Ravsese floated beneath the translucent floorboards above her in dark, icy cold water. The man from before accompanied her, with his white beard and hair, his scaled tail and spiralling horns, and wide leathery wings. They floated in the darkness in eerie silence, hand in hand, looking at each other and unable to speak as they held their breath in the water. No other walls or features established any orientation or space, except for the icy floorboards above, which seemed to go on forever. Suddenly, the man was yanked down, slipping from her grasp, and Ravsese saw dark, writhing limbs and appendages embracing him as he sank beneath her toward the large, pale eye in the darkness below them. Looking up at her with an expression of fear and abandonment, she realized that he looked familiar to her, but she couldn't identify why. She flipped over and swam down to him, grabbed his outstretched muscular forearm in both of her hands, and kicked violently upward, trying to free him from his imprisonment. But it was to no avail, and as her lungs began to burn, she let him go only to swim upwards and find the floorboards right on top of her. Spinning around, she found Piecora's hatchet buckled at her side, so she grabbed it and hacked at the floorboards with impassioned fury that she had never known before. There was a loud crack in the floorboards, followed by several others, until a turbulent upswell whisked her upwards through the translucent, icy floor. Ravsese bolted upright as something touched her feet. She was unable to see in the darkness, but then she heard Piecora at the base of the bed. "Shh! It's only me. Time for your watch." Slowly, Ravsese got up from the bed and let Piecora slide in between the children, taking her place. She then quietly opened the door, left the room and shut it behind her. The narrow hall before her led into a large open area lit with several hanging lamps along the walls. Here the hall was dark with no other doors except one on the right that opened to a bath. But she could see out of the hall and into the dimly lit larger room beyond. She slid to the floor with her back against the door as she tried pushing the nightmare from her mind. Strangely, her thoughts went to Dorglir, and once again she was torn between missing him and never wanting to see him again. "Why does he always creep back into my mind?" she thought to herself. It was as if her heart wouldn't let go of the link that she and Dorglir shared with Ortor, and she would never escape the feelings of shame and regret for leaving Ortor's father. "I did it for Ortor," she persisted within her mind. "I did it so he could have a better life, free from House Veklisha, free from Muthan prejudice, free from oppression and persecution. But Dorglir promised a better life for us both. A happy life, her mind rebuked. You only thought of yourself. You only left because you weren't happy. You didn't love Dorglir, and no matter what he could have provided for you and your son, your own priorities meant more to you than Aurta. You were selfish and blinded by your own misery, and you still are. Admit it. Aurta will grow to hate you for it. She threw her hands up to her face and began sobbing quietly, trying not to wake anyone behind the door. She desperately wanted to scream, but she stifled her emotions into fitful tears and gasps into her hands. Never before had she felt such debilitating loneliness. Then the memory of Hector Ganta and his menacing eyes on her surfaced abruptly, and she stopped crying. She remembered the truth, that she and her son were sold to him by Dorglir's father, Dorian Vecklischer, Chancellor to King Mendilshus Newman of Muth. Chancellor Dorian had orchestrated everything, including her escape and emigration to Coast Haven, simply because he would not accept her and her son into his family, and the family that Dorglir wanted. Turns out, it was all out of both of their hands. Dorglir even came to Coast Haven to try and take her back without his father knowing. What would have happened if she accepted? What would that have done to Dorglir, if his father found out that he was secretly caring for the same family that Dorian ostracized and sold to a Canonian nobleman? We would be put to death as an example for Dorglir, she thought soberly. Dorglir would never stand against his father again, and Dorian's control over his son would be complete. The Chancellery would be saved, and so would the Vecklischer line. For Dorglir would marry whomever his father put in his son's path, solely to produce proper Muthan heirs. Dorglir would live the rest of his life an empty shell of a man, much like his father. She raised her knees and rested her elbows on them, leaning her face into her curled fingers as she finally began coming to terms with it all. Escape was the only way forward for everyone, she now saw. But she still held no love for Dorglir's father, Dorian, for although he fixed everything by coordinating her and her son's escape, he still sold them into slavery here in Canonia. She thought again of Hector Ganta and their chance meeting at the bishop's lament. He looked at her with such indignation, as if trying to flee was an insult to his understanding of the world. Just slaves to a new master, she thought angrily. We are nothing to these people, nothing but parcels, commodities, leverage. Just then the sounds of footsteps came to her from the large, dimly lit room at the end of the hall, and all at once her blood turned to ice. She plastered her palms against her wide-open mouth in a silent scream as her eyes went completely round with calcifying fear. Her body trembled uncontrollably, and her breathing came in short, fitful gasps from the very tips of her lungs. The footsteps came louder. They sounded to her like hard shoes on the floorboards, and the pace of the steps seemed like a relaxed walking pace. Occasionally they would halt for a few moments, and then they would begin again, only closer. Her mind flooded with white noise, and her ears pounded with her accelerated heart rate. She pressed herself against the corner of the hallway, with her knees all the way up against her chest, then wrapped her arms around them. She buried her face into her knees and peered forward through the darkness of the hallway at whoever would be revealed in the dimly lit room beyond. Finally, the footsteps were so near that she braced herself to see the figure emerge. But they halted again, just to the left of the archway. For moments that stretched into eternity, she stared unblinking at the room at the end of the hall, waiting and trembling. Unexpectedly, something small appeared on the floor just to the left of the hall, a little round shape silhouetted against the dim lamplight of the room beyond. It stood still for a moment, then got up on its haunches and sniffed the air with its pointed nose. Ravsesi saw two tiny pinpricks of reflected light in its face as it peered down the hall at her. It moved again, sniffing the floor as it crossed the threshold of the hallway until it stood up once again and looked at her. And then it was gone, disappearing from view beyond the right wall of the hallway. A rat, thought Ravses as she fought with herself to come down from her debilitating panic. But where are the footsteps? Are they still there? She sat there motionless for a while longer, without hearing a single footstep, slowly regaining control of herself. Finally, after a long time of achieving absolute clarity and listening with all of her being for more footsteps, she slowly stood up and crept forward. She inched her way down the left wall of the hallway and slowly peered around the corner into the large, dimly lit room. Nothing. No mouse, no rat, and no person could be seen in the vast hall to her left. She looked to her right, and again she saw nothing. After standing there for a little while longer, straining her hearing to pick up anything besides Piecora's distant, muffled snoring from their room, she finally turned and walked back to the door, opened it, entered the bedroom and shut it behind her. She quietly moved around the bed and lit the oil lamp on the small desk and found Piecora awake and watching her while the children slept soundly. "I'll be glad when we finally leave this place," whispered Ravses. "My mind is beginning to play tricks on me." "Did anything happen?" asked Piecora. "You look frightened." "We are indeed not alone," said Ravses. "This place has rats." "You saw them?" asked Piecora. "I was visited by one right down the hall. It looked right at me and kept going," Ravses said. "Well then," said Piecora, "of course there's rats down here. We should be surprised it took this long for them to reveal themselves to us." The rat reminded Ravses of something that's been nagging her since they fell into this place. "Where is Hero?" she asked. "I don't know," said Piecora glumly. She shrugged her shoulders and shook her head slowly like someone utterly defeated. You do not feel connected to him?" Ravses asked. "No, we're cut off," Piecora said quietly. "I don't know what happened to him, and I cannot feel him, cannot see through his eyes. Sensory transference requires a moment of eye contact. I think when we fell he stayed on the surface. I hope he's all right." Ravses thought about how she felt when she found Arthur again and couldn't help but mourn deeply for Piecora. She could see that Piecora missed Hero more deeply than she allowed herself to express, and concluded that this must be what's been bothering Piecora since they arrived at the mansion. "Even more reason to quickly find our way out of here," Ravses said. "By the wind and rain on my face, I feel so horrible for you. I know what it's like to feel something missing from my soul. I will do everything I can to help reunite you with Hero. He must be up there terrorizing those bricklayers." Piecora chuckled sardonically. "He probably is, no doubt. Very willful and persistent. He is a spitfire, you know, and I mean that literally." Thank you for listening to this chapter from the Book of Urm. If you enjoyed this reading, like and subscribe to our channel, and consider supporting us at the Book of Urm at patreon.com.